Norway Chess 2025 has easily been the most thrilling and hard-fought tournaments in recent memory. The event had an unusually high number of decisive games and extremely fighting play. The best game, in my opinion, featured possibly the best player of all time, Magnus Carlsen, playing black, and Arjun ERIGAISI, one of the young Indian super grandmasters playing white. The game was not only fascinating, but also decided the winner of the tournament. ERIGAISI playing white started with d4. d5, c4, e6, we have Queen's Gambit decline. Declined because Magnus Carlsen didn't take the pawn on c4. Otherwise, it would be accepted. Knight c3, developing the knight, knight f6, Magnus Carlsen follows suit, develops the knight, and we have exchange variation. Usually doesn't lead to anything extraordinary, but based on my personal experience, playing this for black is actually not very comfortable. Bishop g6, pinning the knight to the queen. Bishop e7 blocks that diagonal. e3 to develop light square bishop. Castle for Magnus. And bishop d3 going to a very nice long diagonal. h6 asking the question to the bishop where it will go. Removes, retreats to h4, and pawn to c6, all standard stuff, defending the pawn on d5. Knight develops to e2. It has more options from here to go to like f4 or g3 or different squares like that in the future, and also prepares short castle. Knight d7, Magnus pretty much does the same thing, connects his knights, and Arjun ERIGAISI castle short. a5, immediately Magnus starts attack on the queen side of the board. f3, very typical maneuver here for white. He prepares the move e4 to control the center of the board. Magnus doesn't pay any attention to that and continues his attack on the queen side of the board with b5. Arjun plays queen c2, creating that battery for the on the long diagonal with the queen and the bishop, and after rook e8, he plays e4. Mission accomplished. The center is his. b4, immediately challenging the knight. Arjun has to retreat it to a4, and Magnus plays d takes e4, exchange of the pawns happens. Now white has a very nice strong center with two pawns, and black is planning some attacking on that center, but nobody expected the next move. Knight takes e4. What a move by Magnus. Computer loves it, sacrifices that knight. Of course, it's only one move sacrifice, because if white takes the knight on e4, black would take the bishop on h4. So they will have an advantage. The bishop is better than the knight in this type of open positions. So Arjun took the bishop on e7, and after bishop takes e7, queen takes e7. Actually, Magnus has now the rook and the queen to protect the knight on e4, not losing any material. With the exception of the pawn on c6. ERIGAISI takes the pawn on c6, now has an extra pawn, but this position is pretty much even because black has all the activity, and here Magnus plays knight f6. Knight f6 and sacrifices the rook on a8. ERIGAISI gladly accepts the gift. Magnus checks from e3, king h1, and he takes the bishop on d3. So basically he sacrificed the exchange as he took the bishop and allowed ERIGAISI to take the queen. The rook, I'm sorry, on a8. Let's look at this position. Again, white has an extra exchange, but after knight f4 and queen takes d4, black has good compensation for it and also an extra pawn. So white is better, but it's not so easy to prove. Here, Arjun plays a rook d1. Computer doesn't like it, because it preferred immediate rook c1, attacking the bishop on c8. But ERIGAISI played first rook d1, the black queen has to retreat to e5, and now rook c1, and it turns out that the bishop on c8 is actually pretty much helpless. It's very difficult, almost impossible to protect it, and therefore Magnus gives up on that bishop, plays knight f8. ERIGAISI takes the bishop on c8, and now Magnus sacrifices the queen. Queen takes f4. Queen takes f4. Obviously, you cannot take the queen with the rook because you're gonna get checkmated on the first ring. And therefore, ERIGAISI plays queen a6. Very nice move. It protects the rook on f1. And if rook takes c8, obviously you don't take the rook with the queen because you're gonna get checkmated again. You just take the queen on f4, and after rook c1 checked, it's not a checkmate because there is a rook f1, and again, the rook is protected by the queen. Let's return to the actual position in the game. After queen takes f4, queen a6, Magnus sacrifices the queen, his queen again. Queen takes f1, and now after queen takes f1, rook takes c8. We have a position where Magnus has a rook, a knight, and a pawn against a queen. White is a little better, but not by much. ERIGAISI plays h3, very important prophylactic move to create an escape square for the king. Rook d8, queen a6, and ERIGAISI is going after the queenside pawns for Magnus. If he takes both of those pawns, Magnus' position is gonna be pretty much lost. But Magnus has other ideas. He plays rook d5, he protects that pawn on a5, knight b6 attacking the rook, and rook goes to c5, still protecting the pawn on a5. But ERIGAISI is very persistent. He plays knight c4, and now both the queen and the knight attack the pawn on a5, and that pawn is lost, nothing you can do. So what good players do in those type of situation? They create counterplay. And Magnus starts this with knight e6. He develops the knight into the game. Knight takes a5 for ERIGAISI, and g5. And Magnus' plan here is to open up white king. Knight c4, g4. Continues Magnus. b3 protects the knight on c4, so the queen can move around without being glued to protecting that knight. Exchange of the pawns on h3, and the king on h1 is becoming a target of black pieces, the rook and two knights. Rook h5, attacking the pawn on h3. ERIGAISI protects the pawn with the king. King g7, queen b7, going after the pawn on b4, and here comes knight g5, and it turns out that the pawn on h3 cannot be protected. So ERIGAISI plays knight d6, rook takes h3 for Magnus check, king g2, and rook d3. The knight on g5 is protecting the pawn on f7, so there are no any checkmate ideas there for white. In the meantime, the knight on d6 is under attack by the rook, so knight f5 check, king g6, knight e7 check. If Magnus played here king g7, the game would probably end in a draw because the position would simply be repeated. But Magnus is Magnus. He plays for the win and goes king h5. The king starts traveling. Queen takes b4, and now white has two connected passing pawns on the queen side of the board, but very dangerously looking king on g2. Knight e4 for Magnus, and the clouds are gathering around the white king. King f1, rook d2. And now the king is cut off from the game at all. And the position for white is looking very, very dangerous. Computer agrees. And after queen b5, according to computer, to the engine, Magnus has a 4-pawn advantage here. Pretty much a winning position. But the winning move here, first of all, he checked on d1, king g2, he made another check, position repeated, and here, believe it or not, the winning move is not human-like move to find f5. And the whole reason for this move, and why is it's so good, because the idea is to unpin that knight on g5. That knight has to participate in checkmating the white king. And f5 solves that issue. So let's take a look at the variation. f5. If queen takes f5, then simply knight g3, fork, and the queen is lost. And if knight takes f5, then we have rook f2 check, king e1, knight f3 check. The only move is king d1, knight c3, fork, and black wins a queen and a game. So f5 was the winning move. Was it possible to find it with 5 minutes left on the clock from Magnus? I guess for Magnus, yes, but overall, I think the move is very, very difficult to find. So Magnus plays king g4. He involves the king into attack, queen f5 check, king g3, another check, king f3, another check. And now the position was repeated several times. And here Magnus could have taken the draw with repetition, but again, for the second time in this game, he decides to continue and plays king e3, still playing for a win. ERIGAISI checks with knight d5. That's a mistake. And here Magnus had two choices where to go with the king. King d3 is actually leads to a drawing position. King d4 leads to a winning position for black, and he chooses the right continuation, king d4. And now his position is winning again. ERIGAISI plays king e1, and here the winning continuation, the only winning continuation for black, was to play rook h2. The variations are very difficult, and I'm sure Magnus didn't feel like he could calculate everything with 36 remaining on the clock. And he decided to take the pawn on a2. And that was losing a lot of his advantage. After queen d7, there are discovery checks all over the place. So Magnus checks from a1. And in this position, he decides not to continue to play for the win and just agree to a draw by repeating the moves. So this fascinating game with imbalanced material, rook and knight against the queen, ended in a draw. And not always draw games are so fascinating. And in my opinion, it was really the best or one of the best games of the tournament. And not only that, because of this draw, Magnus Carlsen actually became the winner of Norway 2025 chess tournament. And if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate if you can like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon on my channel. Thank you for watching.